NFL strategy show. Chris Randone, Manny Laura, presented by our wonderful sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Manny, good morning. MIA, we are here. What's going on, man?
Yeah, man. I want to say, dude, my weather's nice. Haha, you suck, but you're here too, man. So you have, and the weather hasn't been great, but at least it's not freezing like in other parts of the U.S., right? So no, it's good. Another fun week in NFL. We're gonna sweat it out this weekend. It's gonna be pretty cool, and I don't know, man. Hopefully, we can make some money. So let's give the viewers what they want, right?
Yeah, man. No, I flew in yesterday, and I'm like, man, it's raining, but the humidity was like, you know what? I'd rather have humidity and rain rather than cold, freezing rain
Oh
any
yeah,
day.
100%, 100%. I say it all
Like,
the time. Like even if it rains, because like they complain, oh, it rains here too much. Like, dude, I'd rather have it like warm and rain than dude. Freezing, I just can't do anything. I feel like I don't want to shower for like 10 days. You know, that it's the worst. So yeah, I'll take it like this.
yo, man, I'll tell you what, though, I'm excited for Week 15. Some interesting things to talk about. I feel like people are now starting to catch on to play Dolphins players, play games that maybe normally you wouldn't look at because I just updated the ownership, and top two guys are coming from the same game, Miami, New York Giants, which I think in recent weeks we probably wouldn't have seen that. But it looks like people are starting to catch on that we don't have to play games that have such high over-unders. We can play games that just have great plays and great matchups.
Yeah, no, and then the injury, and then now departure of Janoris Jenkins makes a huge difference for the matchups. And then if Devontae Parker can play or not, obviously huge too. It could open some holes, could open some value. So yeah, a ton of stuff in that Miami game, and I'd even argue it's not just Miami. Maybe on the other side too, right? Miami's not a good defense at all. So just that game in general, it feels like for DFS we love to target like the really really bad games to where. We can find either one of value or just big performances. But yeah, two bad defenses, bad teams square off, and yeah, could be a really high scoring game.
Before we get into it, I want to thank our wonderful sponsor at Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, who does have another great tournament this week. If you guys still haven't signed up yet, you can do so by using the code AWESEMO, AWESEMO. You can get into the NFL 175K baller tournament this week, 15K going to first. Not as much competition as compared to maybe the top sites like DraftKings and FanDuel. So if you're looking for maybe a little bit more of an edge, maybe a little bit more of a softer field, you get 3 free entries into that tournament with the way that their Yahoo Sports Rewards points are set up by using that code AWESEMO. So once again, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, thank you. And let's get into it, man. We'll do the ownership first, just looking to kind of see where we're at, how we feel about this, and what kind of strategy we can use with these types of players. But DraftKings, man, Saquon Barkley, 7,700, coming in at the top owned player right now, projected at 31.8%. How do we feel about this matchup against Miami at home?
I mean, it's going to be one of those things if you trust Saquon, right? Because the guy hasn't done anything in the longest time now. It's been since week 8 since we've seen him have over 20 fantasy points, and dude, there's been 3 weeks in there that he hasn't even reached 10. So I mean, it's been brutal. And if you've been playing him because he's been low owned, you feel like he's not really that injured. The touches are still there. Like I have, you've probably been burned now for I don't know, a month straight. And I'm at that point already where, listen, he was 73 before, 74 before. So he's been cheaper than where he's at now. And he's had some decent matchups too. They're not Miami like, right? But I mean, he's faced Tampa. Well, Tampa was kind of tough. He's faced Arizona. Like, he's faced some okay defenses to the point where, listen, even if they were tough defenses, you're Saquon. You're supposed to have these monster games. You can't go a month straight without doing anything, let alone reach 10 fantasy points. I think he's a fine play, of course. And all this, talk and interviews or whatever saying he is 100%. What are you going to say? You're going to say, like, I'm hurting, guys. I'm just trying out there. Like, of course, you're going to say you're 100. So, I don't know. Obviously, he's a good play. Just taking it for what it's worth. If you project him for 20 to 25 touches against Miami, then yeah, you have a spot where I think you could play him. By the way, the Giants are favorite. If you go through my checklist again, it's are you at home? Are you a 3-down back? Are you a favorite? Game script, everything. All of those are checked off for him. So I'd say he is a good play. And even at 32%, I think it still might be fine.
But let me ask you this. I mean, for someone who hasn't really warranted any success, especially over the last 5 weeks, Is this an optimal play knowing that he's the top owned player, hasn't really reached anywhere near his projected totals, and he's not really even that cheap. So you're paying 7,700 for someone that you don't really know what you can get out of him. Doesn't that kind of throw you a red flag to some extent?
Well, here's the thing. Like 7,700 is comparable to who? Guys like Nick Chubb, guys like Zeke, guys like Fournette, guys like Carson. To me, obviously, out of the bunch, Saquon is the quote unquote better player. Has he played like it? No. But look at the guys around him. Has Zeke really played like it? Meh. Like he's had 20 fantasy point games, but not much more over that. Fournette's volume has been there, but in the last month, week 12 is probably the only good game he's had. And if you go back to week 6, there's barely a 20-point game in there. So who are you really missing out on at this range to say like, oh, Barkley, if Barkley hasn't performed, go elsewhere? There really isn't much elsewhere unless you wanted to go, another 1,000 higher and get to Derrick Henry, which is a different story. But for me, Carson hasn't really done much to the point where you can't fade him either. He hasn't done anything since really week 6. So yeah, for me, I think Barkley's totally fine. It's just you don't want to get there after the field has gotten there, after he performs. You want to get there the first try, right? And Miami's a pretty darn good matchup for that.
No, I can see where you're coming from. I just think that from what I've seen, it just doesn't give me the utmost confidence. I know it's a great matchup. Sure. I know it's a great spot for him. But there are things to consider with what have you done for me lately, I think, which we've talked about quite a bit on previous shows. And with him, I mean, he hasn't done much lately. He's, regardless of the matchups, he has a high level of talent at his position, essentially coming into this season, one of the best at his position. So he hasn't fulfilled those expectations. Yes, health could be one of those issues, but it is interesting to see, him being there so high, considering that you do have other guys like Chris Carson, like Aaron Jones, like Fournette, who I think Fournette is probably in a similar type of situation in this type of matchup against Oakland. We just saw Derrick Henry run all over them. So I get it. What about on the flip side of that, who's coming in next at 4,500? Your boy Patrick from the Dolphins at 23.1%. Is this the Laird train?
Yeah, this one's kind of rough because you want to talk about a guy that really hasn't done anything, but there's no competition for touches back there, and that's his thing. By the way, he saw 20 looks, 19 touches. He missed. He didn't catch one of his targets. So he had 19 touches last week at around 4,000 across the industry. That to me is significant because he still played the Jets kind of tough, right? They're middle of the road defense. They're pretty good against the run. I'd say it really wasn't an easy matchup at all, despite the Jets being awful like we saw yesterday. But if you tell me he gets closer to 20 touches again this week against the Giants defense that hasn't done anything all season, they look like they're in all sorts of disarray right now. So I do like him as value. The only thing I question is the ownership getting up there to where he gets there more often than not? That's my main question. And is there any other pivot at, say, this price tag that you can look to? Guys like McCoy, maybe. Guys like Duke Johnson, maybe. But for me, I think Laird might be the guy for now. Yes.
I will say, before this last game against the Eagles, the Giants were somewhat decent against the run. Before this whole Boston guy from Philadelphia went off, and which kind of skewed these numbers. But I will say, in those previous 4 games or 5 games before that, they only surrendered just a little bit over 200 yards on the ground and 1 touchdown to the running back position. So obviously we know the secondary, which has been weak and very inexperienced throughout the entire year, has gotten torched throughout the majority of the season. And that's typically where you like to go against this Giants defense. But there have been games where we saw James White, where we saw not David Johnson, but
Drake?
No, Chase Edmonds.
Oh, Chase Edmonds.
Yeah, remember when Chase Edmonds, he went into New York and just ran all over them. And then obviously Dalvin Cook as well. So before that stretch, they were very vulnerable to the run. And so this is an interesting play because, obviously, if he's getting those touches at 4,500, it's somewhat where you got to say, you know what, it's hard to not pass him up and go with the field on him. But I don't know, man. It's weird because the last few weeks I've liked to attack games where Miami has been in because of really the opportunity for opposing offenses and then them playing from behind. And so I'm not sure kind of how this works in this week's situation. So I'm curious to see kind of where we end up with the field. Highest wide receiver, DeAndre Hopkins, $8,000 coming in next at 20.5%. Really finally came to life last week. Fuller was out, and everyone was on Kenny Stills, which clearly didn't play out for anyone. I'm pretty sure that hurt a lot of people because it hurt me as well. But I mean, here against the Titans, where do we go with him? I mean, is this a position where if we're going to be paying down at running back for, let's say, Patrick Laird, are we going to be paying up at wide receiver? And is this the wide receiver that we run with?
Yeah, I think it has to be him, right? I think he is at least for me, he is the top guy. I absolutely love it. I love the matchup he has with Tennessee. I even like that they have a pretty bad game script that might fall behind in this one. And anytime, obviously, for a receiver, if they're trailing, you love it, right? They're going to be in passing mode the majority of the time. They don't even have a really good running game to begin with anyway, so it works out kind of perfectly. I like him that he's sitting around 8K-ish. I think anything a little bit higher than that would have been troublesome. I like the ownership at about 20%. That seems pretty standard for a guy in this position. And obviously, if you're factoring in the what have you done for me lately, you're coming off a really good game and 2 really good games out of the last 3 weeks for DeAndre. So yeah, I just love the kind of the momentum, kind of like he's stretching the field, he's going downfield, he's present in the red zone, like everything you want in a receiver. He is kind of doing it right now. Didn't do it in the beginning of the season, but now turning the page big time. And if that's the receiver we're going to continue to get, I feel extremely confident. If you look at Tennessee and what they've done on the season against the pass, not all that impressive, I'd say, right? Ranks near the bottom, I'd say third of the field or the teams. I like him a ton. I really do. And anytime I can fit in Watkins or Watson, it will be Watkins next time.
Yeah, and we've seen what good wide receivers have done to this Titans defense. I mean, really just putting up monster games. And Hopkins is the guy. And if he can continue to really come to life like he has 2 of the last 3 games, this is the Hopkins that we know that can perform. And they're in a situation right now where it's a must win at each game, day in and day out for the rest of the season. So I think you can't go wrong there at 8K with him. Chris Carson was a guy that I talked about just before, with Saquon being the highest and then him coming at next at 7,500. He's 19.5%. Carolina can't stop the run. I mean, that's just bottom line. They're just not great defensively when it comes to stopping the run. And we've seen that almost every single week as of late. You would have to think now with Penny being out, he's just going to continue to get a majority of the bulk load and not have to worry about this 50-50 split that they were talking about over the last couple of weeks. So I love this play. Now 19.5%. I like to be over the field actually in this matchup. What about you?
Yeah, I'd love to also, but the problem is like roster construction doesn't fit this type of play this week. So guys hovering around this price range. I mean, well, if you want Fournette over Carson, sure. But that's probably the only decision you have to make. A couple things here. Patrick Laird being the obvious chalk, or quote unquote chalk at 4,500, lets you get up to, say, a McCaffrey if you want to. And I think the optimal lineup this week is leaning towards like a Laird McCaffrey combination where it'll equal 2 mid-tier guys, right? Say a Fournette and Chris Carson. It'll equal almost around the same salary, where if that's the case, do people want to go the Laird McCaffrey route or the 2 mid-tier guys, say even Saquon and Carson or Saquon and Fournette? Or one of those 2 guys. I think you have to make that choice this week. So if it is going to be a guy like Carson, it is going to be paired with maybe a Saquon, maybe a Fournette, and that's kind of where I stick with it. But it's not saying that Carson's a bad player or anything. Just kind of right now where the upside lies, I think there's a tiny bit more upside in Laird and McCaffrey than there is in say a Carson or Fournette or Carson and Saquon. So nothing wrong with Carson. Absolutely love it. And if you're going that mid-tier route, Carson's definitely my top option there.
Let me ask you this, because with this type of situation, I think this is a great question that maybe other people would want to know. You said the optimal play might be Laird and McCaffrey, which would equate to 14.5 in salary. And so I guess my question to you is, what is sometimes more optimal? Is it the McCaffrey and then the low priced potential running back, or is it potentially the 2 workhorse running backs that such as like a Fournette and Carson, or maybe like a Carson and Barkley? Which way is the more optimal approach when it comes to roster construction when you're trying to balance the 2?
Yeah, that's a very good question because I feel like a lot of people have trouble with this, right? It's they're very similar in salary, whether it's 14.5 or 15K or whatever. And it's who offers more upside, and kind of how you judge upside really isn't like what's both of their ceilings versus what's the other two ceiling. That would be wrong, right? Because how often do they get to their ceiling? But you have to combine it with what's going to be lower owned and what's the trade-off between ownership and say where they can get, or maybe what their, I don't know, somewhere around their 80th percentile score can be, right? So guys like Laird and McCaffrey for me, I think because Laird in this instance, it's probably a decent play, and I have him actually projected for closer to 15 points rather than last week where it was closer to 11 maybe. This week I actually have him up there. I like the matchup a ton, meaning to me at that price tag, he has somewhat of a pretty good ceiling, at least for me. And then obviously McCaffrey has a bigger ceiling than anyone in the game. So it's does that outweigh, and do their ownerships combined outweigh the, I don't know, Saquon and Carson ownership, which Saquon being the highest owned guy, number one, and then Carson being wherever he's at now at about 20%. That to me is probably more ownership than what I'm comfortable with. And then on top of that, if I like the pairing of Laird and McCaffrey better, then I probably would side with that side. They both have comparable upside, I will say, because obviously Barkley and Carson have pretty good projections. But Laird and McCaffrey, I think I'll give a nod because of their ownership, and I still like kind of the value Laird brings too.
Is McCaffrey's ownership inflated because of Laird?
Of course, has to be. I think anytime you have a guy that's 10K, you need value to get there. Because if you like for example, and I do this all the time. Anytime you have McCaffrey in a lineup, you usually have Laird. But in order to double check this, like sometimes I will just even though I'm not going to run this, uncheck Laird and see how your lineups come out, right? To see how much McCaffrey you get, or if you like Dalvin Cook or whoever you like, Derrick Henry up there, see how much of those guys you get without Laird and without the obvious chalk, just so you can see how lineups are influenced because of one or two players. Yeah.
What about saying no to McCaffrey? What if you went Laird and Carson or Laird and Barkley?
Sure. I mean, you're going to have to spend the salary somewhere, right?
Right, exactly. But I'm just saying, though, because with what we've seen over the last 2 weeks from McCaffrey, I mean, obviously it has been a little bit different than what we saw a bunch of weeks before that. And so, and the matchup, isn't the best, I would say. I would say Seattle has definitely played some formidable defense as of late. But I mean, it's also something that is something to consider if you're wanting to be kind of a little sneaky than maybe what the field might be thinking. Because if everyone goes Laird and McCaffrey, then you're going to have to differentiate yourself at the wide receiver position. But if you go maybe, let's say, Laird and someone else, that gives you even more upside. Maybe you can get a little bit more pricier wide receivers together or pay up at tight end. And it's just something to think about because obviously we're in week 15 now. And if you're doing the same thing week in and week out, you're not necessarily going to have success. So it's nice to maybe look at things and switch things up because I have kind of fallen into the trap of the last 2 weeks of the McCaffrey and the low price player, And maybe I could have played other guys in better matchups that could have also maybe pay up at other positions instead of paying down and not really having as much value as I could have.
Yeah, for sure. I think anytime you see it's very clear that value influences the top tier guys because they just cost so much. And getting away from that type of roster construction, at least in some portion of your lineups, if you're running multiple lineups, is definitely a good idea. So, just try it out. See what you like better. See what projections look like. See what your overall lineup scores look like. And if you just like the trade-off between not having Laird and having Laird, you don't have to go full fade or completely lock. You can do a little bit of both, play out different scenarios, right? And that's kind of what we do in MME. And yeah, if you like one pair better than the other, then go for it for sure.
Last guy we'll talk about with DraftKings, Todd Gurley, 6K at Dallas, 17.6%. McVay, I mean, he talked about it. We're going to go back to the old way of how we kind of utilize Gurley. And it's kind of came to fruition here the last 2 weeks with how we've kind of seen him. He looks completely different. I'm not going to lie. And so I want to ask you, do you think it was a health thing? Because is he healthy now? Because the way he now has a little bit more speed, he's hitting holes better. Is it the offensive line that is now actually protecting and becoming that offensive line that they were last year? I don't know, but at 6K, it's kind of, if they're going to continue to utilize him like this, how do we say no to that price point?
Yeah, no, I absolutely love what I saw, and it's funny because we were talking about it last week, and it's, well, do you trust coach speak? Do you trust coach speak? Like they say, but like they never really do. They had C.J. Anderson in a playoff game. Like, what? Just because the playoffs are on the line now doesn't mean they're all of a sudden going to start. Like a game now is worth just as much as the first game of the season, right? So I don't know. To me, I don't really buy in coach speak, but when you see the actual touches and you see that last week he had 27 touches, okay, now we're talking, right? Now we're talking to where they're using him in the end zone or in the red zone. He's had touchdowns in back-to-back games. Like, I absolutely love everything, and obviously I wish the passing game work would come up just a little bit more, but I still love it. Now the thing is, every time they get out to a lead, it's the same thing. Like, he just never plays. All that he did last week, right? Had 23 carries, about 80 yards and a touchdown, caught 4 passes for 34. All that equated to just 21 fantasy points. Like, it's not like we saw a 30 burger or something here, right? So, what do we get out of Gurley this week? I like it. I like the price tag. I like the ownership. I like the matchup. I like everything. It's just, can I play him over the guys we've spoken about already? I think that's the tough part. Being different and being contrarian in large field tournaments, yeah, absolutely love Gurley, and I will have probably over the field on him. But if you're just talking just optimal plays, I think there's still a few guys at different price points that are a little bit better.
I will say earlier in the year, he would play a set of downs and then Malcolm Brown would, and they would
Right.
kind of switch and switch and switch. Lately, though, that hasn't been the case. He continues to come on an additional set of downs after they just had a possession. So that's something to at least be mindful of and at least have some optimism, because if it was continuing like that, it really limits his potential. So outside of maybe Malcolm Brown getting that red zone carry last week to score the first touchdown of the game, I think outside of that, I really do like him at 6K. And I think he can be somewhat of someone who, if he does get those 20 plus carries, he could put up 30 points. I mean, the way that they've ran the ball and the way that the offensive line has been blocking and opened up holes, I really do like that.
Yeah, I think you're totally fine. I'm right there with you.
FanDuel, I mean, pretty much the same guys at the top. Chris Carson does come in right under Barkley right now, currently on the Osmo projections. But as you move a little bit down to like the 5-6 round, Darren Waller, 6,200 tight end, going to be at home against Jacksonville, 20%. Tight end position has been interesting, I would say, over the last couple of weeks with the cheap guys, Higbee, Ian Thomas, and really just giving you that salary relief. Tight end on FanDuel is not as drastic compared to DraftKings with how much salary relief you get. So at 6,200, how do you feel about Darren Waller here being up so high?
Yeah, that one's that one's kind of tough. We don't have the obvious Arizona team on this. Well, we do, but no real tight end you can target against them because there's pretty much no work on that Browns team. But so it's kind of tough to just say, oh, the cheapies here, let's just go here, everyone, no matter what their name is. But that's not on the slate. It's kind of my slate where I like my Wallers, my Kelseys, my Kittles all at the top because I love playing good tight ends. And that's kind of how we see it on FanDuel, right? It's Waller, Kelce, Kittle, Ertz all up there. And those are usually the guys I play every single week. Yeah, I like Waller a ton. I like the price tag because he's been, I wouldn't say he's been awful, right? Because he hasn't been awful, but he hasn't posted the 20-point games. And I remember we talked about it specifically when I said this might have been like 2-3 months ago, maybe, where Waller was fine, but everyone's really overrating this guy. He's still on a really bad offense, a team that doesn't really score all that much, and he had one good game. He's a new kid in town, and everyone loves him, but he's had just 2 20-plus fantasy point games the entire season. That's it. And one of them, week 3, if you're talking FanDuel, was 20.6. That's it. He doesn't have any more. So to just all of a sudden say, all right, he's back. This is the guy. It's okay. If the price tag's good enough, if the matchup's good enough, sure. And I do think for FanDuel, yes, Darren Waller is my top guy. I think I because I like Kelce and the Mahomes stack a little bit more, will put Kelce over him. But I think either 1A or 1B this week, Waller and Kelce.
I think I'm not sure I like him on FanDuel. And I'll say this because you mentioned a great point. He's only reached that 20-point threshold, I think what you said 2 times, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And then 8 games, he's been under 10 points. And so, I mean, you have to look at that sample size and say, well, he's 6,200. What was that?
No, you're good.
Okay. I was going to say at 6,200, I'd rather go elsewhere. I think I'd rather pay up for Kittle, who's in a much better matchup. And also, regardless if he's 7,200 or not, but he has way more upside, I believe, than Waller does. I think the Waller hype is just too much right now. And at 20%, I think it's an easy fade. I don't think you have to look at this and say it's a must play. I think it's easier to say that it's easier to fade him here than actually say he's a must play.
For sure. I don't think anyone, especially a tight end, anyone is a must play, right? So I'm right there with you. I don't think he's a must play, but I think it's finally a week where I can see the reason why people are rostering him, to where most of the weeks it was actually tough to get there from week to week. So this week I see it. I still think I sided with Kelsey a little bit more, but yeah, I'm right there with you.
Last guy we'll talk about, Christian Kirk, 6,100 at home against Cleveland, 18.7%. So currently right now he's above Hopkins, and Christian Kirk is the projected number 1 owned wide receiver on FanDuel for this weekend.
Yeah, no, I actually like him quite a bit. I actually give a huge bump to Arizona this week, and that includes Kyler Murray, that includes Kirk, that includes Fitz. Like, all these guys for me are kind of in play, to the point where, yeah, I actually do see it. I actually do see it. He was limited during practice, so it's kind of murky right there, but I do think he's still in play, and yeah, he will be amongst my top receivers. I am still going a lot of Hopkins, but yeah, Kirk will still be in there for me.
All right. Before we get into the second part of this show, don't forget, for anyone who's in here, if you haven't signed up for Awesemo.com yet, you can use the code NFL Strategy, get 50% off your first month, use all the tools and resources from the number 1 player in the world himself, Awesemo, Alex Baker, and go to the Awesemo.com/NFL landing page, because you can see a lot of great tools and resources, see what they're all about, see if they kind of fit what you're needing for your fantasy play. And that'll at least give you the opportunity to see if this is something that you think is worth it. And that's why we give you 50% off your first month. So don't forget, the NFL code is, or the promo code is NFL Strategy. All right. I want to talk about one thing that is very conflicting, I think, over the last few weeks. And it's the low price players. I think last week we had Powell. This week we have Laird. I think Washington was also maybe somewhat last week. If people got the news, they played him as well, which actually worked out. But I think what it comes down to is, when you have these low price players, typically your mindset is, okay, I'm going to be paying up here, I'm going to be paying up there. And then people get stuck into just playing these guys just because, not even for the matchup, but just because maybe of ownership or maybe a projected total. And so my question to you is, maybe for anyone who's in here or someone who has suffered from this before, because I know I have, is it okay to say no to low price guys, even though they're going to be high owned? And I say this because I think people have the fear of, well, if I don't play Powell, he's going to go off and I'm not going to have him. And then it starts messing with the psyche of how you roster construction.
Yeah, no, it's a really tough question to answer and just give a general answer, because not every low priced guy is equal, right? And there's some that are literally just backups, and they'll do it for this week and probably never be relevant again. And then there's some guys that were actually relevant before, and then all of a sudden are now even more relevant because of the injuries ahead of them. So a few things for me, it's do the low price guys, because here's the thing, a lot of people think the low price guys, it's if you can get me to 10 or 12, I can still get to, that's still value, quote unquote 3x or whatever people do, and then I could afford an extra McCaffrey who's going to give me 50 and I'm going to have the nuts, well, a few things can happen. It's more than likely that the low-owned guy or the cheaper guy is not going to get to your 15, 20 that you need, because just because he costs 3K or 4K doesn't mean he can get you 10 or 12. Like, if you see winning lineups, and forget the milli maker, if you see winning lineups in every tournament, every single position all the way down had guys that scored 20, 25, 28 or whatever, and that's how you get to a 300 score, a 280 score or whatever. But you can't say, oh, I have a 3K guy, it's okay if he gets me 10 because he's 3K, because McCaffrey's going to get me 50. Another thing that could happen is, what if McCaffrey doesn't get 50? right? Like, what if McCaffrey doesn't get what you think he's going to get, and you sacrificed a 10-point player to get McCaffrey, and now McCaffrey 2 weeks in a row has 17 and 24. Now the combination of, say, if you're running it this week, Laird and McCaffrey gives you another 24, Laird gives you 12, and you just paid, again, $15K for some garbage scores from both of them, and now you're really, really far behind the guys that, did get there and the guys that went mid-tier and kind of. So it's high risk, high reward if it works. The problem is the high reward doesn't work as much as people think it does, and I think that's where the field goes wrong sometimes.
Yeah, and then psychologically, the following week, it kind of messes with your mind because you're wondering, well, is this still a play that I can do? Maybe I shouldn't do that. And then you start questioning kind of how you construct your roster. And so it's just really important to know that you made a great point, is that high reward is risky. And sometimes we focus so much on needing someone like a McCaffrey to go off just to hold the weight of the other player. And that could be more detrimental than people realize.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing here, I think, especially when you're using FC and you want to you want to look over your exposure and see where you're landing. A lot of the times, because of how optimizers work, you just have the guys at the top that are like, so your 80%ers will be the Lairds of the world, or will be like, if there's like, for example, like an Allen Hurns cheap, let's say he was like 4K flat or something, that would be like, 80%, because how an optimizer works, since it's trying to maximize the amount of points in every lineup, it's going to use a cheap guy so you can get a lot of the expensive guys who have higher projections, and that's going to give you a higher point total at the end of the day. So it's kind of counterintuitive, because you don't want a ton of, Laird at the top. You don't want a ton of guys, because those guys don't really get to you to 20, 25 points all that often. All they're doing is letting you get someone who does, right? So what you really want is, you want the Hopkins at the top. You want the, I don't know, the McCaffreys if you can, the Fournettes, the Carsons, the Kelseys. And as you go down, guys that you have, smaller amounts of, then that should be guys like Laird at like 20% or 15%. Guys like, Hurns at 10%, Duke Johnson at like 5%. Those guys don't get there often. So to have a lot of those guys really doesn't make much sense. And it feels like you're doing good. It feels like he's clear value and you should have a lot of them. But the math doesn't really work that way. It should be opposite almost.
Sometimes what I do is I'll run just a plain crunch with nothing, just to see what Cruncher's thinking on its own.
Right.
And then what I'll do is I'll look at percentages. And if there's slow guys, let's just say like Hopkins at 5%, Watkins at 3%, Kirk at 2%, what I'll do is I'll up their exposure. And I'll up their exposure to then see how they fit in the newer crunched lineups.
Right.
And that'll give me an idea if these lineups are actually optimal, comparable to the first ones that I did, with everything like the, going in and adjusting randomness and exposure, and then comparing the two, and which of the two I feel would be the best potential play for that specific tournament.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I think seeing different views of things is obviously going to influence, but help you out a little bit more. Like a lot of things I mention in some of my content is, what does the optimal lineup look like this week? How are optimizers building the lineups from the very beginning, and see where you can differentiate without sacrificing a ton, right? And I think that's key, obviously, in large field tournaments. But if you could understand this, and again, there's no reason we shouldn't, right? We have a week till the next slate every time. We should understand the slate like the back of our hands, and that means roster construction too. And when you do that, I think that's a pretty good exercise. Just run it clean to see what you get, and after start tweaking a little bit, but don't make any drastic adjustments to the point you're playing horrible lineups. It's, make good lineups, just see kind of what everyone else is playing first.
Another question I want to tap into is Fantasy Cruncher on a specific topic. When you crunch and you have everything set up, and Cruncher, a Fantasy Cruncher is putting in someone that fits in the lineup, and the projection, however, is a little bit less than maybe some other player. And you do have the salary to go and actually get that player. So my question to you is how do you make it to where that other player can fill into that lineup if it happens repeatedly?
Yeah, so a few things. So if that happens, are you running randomness, number one? If you're not, how many uniques you're running is a big thing too, right? So it's very easy to just scroll all the way down and see, well, I used Larry Fitzgerald there, but like I could definitely fit in Sterling Shepard, and I have Sterling Shepard, projected more. Well, the only reason it wouldn't do that, and remember, Fantasy Cruncher doesn't give something to anyone, or it doesn't have a mind of its own. It's just following numbers. So if you had three uniques, let's just say, in there, and Sterling Shepard is someone you use in a previous lineup and would only fulfill a rule of two uniques in that lineup, then it won't be able to use Sterling Shepard in there. And that's why it's sacrificing Sterling Shepard for someone like Larry Fitzgerald. I'm just giving you an example. Or if you have randomness, where randomness chooses everyone's projection per lineup, and it's somewhere between a range that you set, whether it's 10% or 5% or 20, that's probably why Shepard for that lineup got the priority over Fitzgerald, because for that lineup, it projected Sterling Shepard a little bit higher than Larry Fitz. And that's why I gave you that. So my recommendation is recheck your uniques and how much uniques you're using per lineup. So how many different players it's using from one lineup to the next, and then how much randomness you use. Obviously, the higher randomness, the more of this is going to play out, and in maybe in less evident spots too. So maybe it'll happen in running back and wide receiver at the same time in the same lineup if you use a lot more randomness. So just careful with those two settings specifically, how much or how little you do.
Sometimes I think it would be sometimes it's more imperative, or it's more impactful for me to start off at a lower randomness and increase it little bit by bit, because then you get to see not only how Fantasy Cruncher works, but now you're seeing different variations based on the incremental growth of the percentages that you're releasing.
Sure.
And so that gives you a telltale sign of where maybe that sweet spot is for you in your process.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen so many different things in people message me just asking, is this okay? Is this good? Is this bad? I've seen guys run 3 different crunches of one with 1 unique, one with 2 uniques, one with 3 uniques. See how that works. One with no randomness, one 5%, 10%, 20%, just to see how that works. And it lets you know a lot about how lineups are being built and what's good and what's projected to be good and what's working. And yeah, I started implementing some of the stuff now during the week to kind of see where you can get different a little bit. And I think you'll look at MME in a different way if you start just experimenting during the week. Obviously, those aren't your final lineups. Just experiment to see what happens. And I think you'll be open to many different, not just stacks, settings, game stacks or whatever, but it'll open your eyes to a lot more than you probably weren't seeing before.
Next question that I think is maybe something we all can really get more clarity on is, last week was a great example of a game that really had no fantasy expectations, primarily maybe outside of 1, maybe 2 guys if you really thought about it. But the 49ers Saints game. Obviously, as we know, there was so much fantasy production that came from there, and it was the complete opposite of maybe what everyone in the industry thought. And my question to you, or maybe just an overall general understanding, is looking at games, and we've talked about this before, the over-unders and how we discredit games. What kind of approach do you think is fair to at least not eliminate games from your player pool or from your process, but to at least give it consideration? Because it seems as if you just eliminate games or discredit games because of over-unders or because of Vegas totals or things of that nature, you're really limiting your upside to be not only contrarian, but to really differentiate yourself from the field.
Yeah, so games are important, of course. Vegas is important, and seeing how many points, or roughly how many points a team will score and a game will score, is imperative for projections, right? And I say projections because we don't play an entire game, right? We can't play an entire game. We don't play entire teams. We play players, and that's what we should be using Vegas and games for. Now, just because someone has a 42 total and the Kansas City game has a 50 total doesn't mean we all should only play Kansas City, because, again, we're playing players. Right now, how it works is, you have a game total, and that's why Mahomes is projected a little bit higher, because they're projected to score more points. Most of the points come because of either him passing or whatever. Less points are happening, say, in the Cincinnati game. Doesn't mean that Andy Dalton and Tyler Boyd have bad projections. It just means they have lower, but they're also priced lower, and they still have a X percentage of getting to the top lineup or scoring X amount of points, right? It's just going to be maybe a little bit less than Pat Mahomes and, say, Tyreek Hill. Doesn't mean it's bad, though. So for the same example you mentioned, last week, a lot of people were talking about how bad the Millie Maker lineup was or whatever. But the combination of Garoppolo to Emmanuel Sanders actually wasn't a bad combination at all, even if the game total was a 40, 41, 42, or whatever it was. Doesn't mean it's bad. It's just they didn't have as high individual projections as, say, someone like Tyreek Hill or something, but it doesn't mean it was bad necessarily. And if you were to rank them last week, I think they were somewhere in the top 10, just probably 9th or something, to whereas everyone's favorite games, because of the totals, were a little bit higher. Doesn't mean they have exponentially better odds to be in the top lineup than does someone in the 9th or 10th spot. So for me, it was know that there's a lot of variance. Know that the very best stack compared to the 10th best stack, yeah, it's still better, but it's not as better as, people think it is, to the point where no one should be playing the 10th best stack. That, to me, that sounds a little ridiculous.
No, it does. And that's why I wanted to focus on that real quick, because you and a lot of other people really talked on the point how a lot of people were saying that Millie Maker lineup was a bad lineup. But if we really take a step back, he actually picked some really good spots and really good plays that a lot of people really weren't on, because they discredited either those matchups or those players. And I think that lineup alone really tells you that there's still an edge in DFS.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because I still have the calculations I did for last week. And if you're talking Emmanuel Sanders, I had him around 3.5 to 4%. To really getting to that spot where you love in tournaments, to where guys like Hopkins and Adams were at around 7 to 8%. So yeah, they have double the chance, but they have like 20 times the ownership that do Garoppolo and Emmanuel Sanders, right? So things like that you have to just factor in, and what over time can make you money. And I think that's kind of the next wave of where DFS will kind of evolve to, yeah, we all know Devontae Adams is a fantastic play. We know that Watson to Hopkins is a fantastic play, but so does the other 20% of the people that are going to roster that pair. So do the other 10% of people that are going to roster Rodgers to Adams. What about the 1% or 0.5% that are going to roster Garoppolo to Sanders, right? Or Garoppolo to Kittle, right? Who Kittle for me was 4% to get there with Garoppolo. So like just stuff like that for me is just like, well, that's kind of the wave you want to live in, to where people are not really seeing this, but they really have a really good shot to get there. A lot of people like Tom Brady and Edelman. To me, that was just 5%, where Garoppolo and Kittle was 4%. Like 1% doesn't make a 10% difference in ownership. So things like that, I think, can go a long way. And just when you get to those high level tournaments, the high stakes, and you're playing against really good players, stuff like this is going to start to matter more.
It really is. And I think you made it great. Like, maybe this can be something as part of the evolution when it comes to the new wave, or the new way that we can incorporate this into either projections or models, which can really not only make it a little bit more competitive, but this is something where we've seen it quite a bit over the last few weeks, where people in matchups not being really looked at, and who knows why. There could be a plethora of reasons why, but these players essentially are those diamonds in the rough, and it's just, how do we maybe put aside just not only how we process and how we analyze things, but maybe incorporate other ways, so that way we have more variations of looking at lineups before we actually go ahead and submit our final ones before lock.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think just kind of again, I can't reiterate enough. Football is extremely random, man. Like extremely, extremely random. We all see the highest projected totals. We all see the highest games. Just know that football is really, really random. Just because they score a lot too doesn't mean they are the very best plays, and that's the way you're going to win every tournament. That does not mean that at all.
What would be your advice for players who maybe come up short? Maybe they're in qualifiers, or maybe they're in low price tournaments where the top dollar prizes are really only at the top, but they're almost there. And being almost there can really affect you in a couple different ways, where one, you might doubt yourself as a player in your process. You also might think that you might need to change what you're doing because you're coming so close. But what is maybe an answer for someone like yourself who has been very open this year, as far as hasn't been the best of NFL seasons, but we know all it takes is one. How do you approach that type of situation where you're so close, players are performing, and maybe you're one or two off? How do you move forward with what you've seen, throughout the course of the season?
Yeah, for sure. I think the main thing for me, and I've been playing for a really long time, it's learn how to lose. And it's the weirdest thing, but like if you can just learn how to deal, not just with swings, and you're right, I'm definitely on a huge downswing now, but if you learn how to lose, and what I mean by that is not just withstand your swings or not get down on yourself. I mean, like, learn why you're losing. And like, for example, in yesterday's showdown slate, something that comes to mind, Lamar Jackson, the highest owned captain, ended up being the best captain on the slate. But what that does is first place was tied between, I think, like 15 people, all getting $31,000 out of a top prize that was supposed to be $250. The next best lineup, which was less than half a point less, at like $800 because there were so many people tied. Then it went to $300 and so on and so forth. What that is telling me is learn how to lose. If you had to fade Lamar Jackson and you thought that was the overall, like over the course of a season type of play, to where if you fade him, eventually it's going to hit to the point where you're going to make a lot of money. Learn how to deal with that, right? Learn how to get away from this field in a smart way, right? To where obviously it's not to that extent in main slates, but learn how to kind of get away from that. Listen, Watson to Hopkins could very well do well this week. And if it does, fantastic. But if it doesn't, don't kind of be scared of that. Same thing with Barkley. Don't be scared of that. I don't say you have to get a lineup full of 1%ers. Obviously not that. But if you could just differentiate in tiny spots where you know the upside probably isn't the best, and you could still kind of pivot and still have high upside lineups, learn how to take that trade every single time. And I think over time you'll see maybe that top score that you've been aiming for. You do nothing in top heavy tournaments with min cashing or making triple your money sometimes. You see green, and I always say can't go broke making a profit. But if you want profit over time and big profits, you want to move up in stakes, learn how to lose really well. And I think you'll be a better player long term.
I think that's a great point. I think don't have an emotional attachment to the lineup, because then that leads to an expectation, and that expectation is only setting you up for failure, because there's no guaranteed outcome that you can predict with any lineup that you essentially create.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. If you're stuck on just one play for whatever reason, there's just no reason for that, man. Every single week is a blank slate. Don't base anything off what happened in the past. Don't fall in love with players. Oh, I won because I played X guy. Don't do that. Just make the very best lineups this week from what you've learned in the past, and continue that way. Always try getting better, and always play according to the tournaments you're playing. And obviously don't do that in cash games. It's not worth it. But in GPPs and tournaments, feel free to go against the grain. Know that you are taking chances, playing probabilities, and if it goes your way, which eventually it will, if you're a good player, then so be it. But don't be scared of some stuff. If you're scared, go play cash games, but you shouldn't be scared in tournaments.
Yeah, and I think another thing that maybe some people get caught up doing is don't compare yourself to other players, and maybe if you see them at the top of the leaderboard, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're being 100% profitable. Make sure you're just focused on yourself and not focused on other success, because your success is really the only success that matters.
I'm right there with you. If people are looking at, say, like an Osimo, why does Osimo win all the time and I don't? Maybe learning the strategies from Osimo is the way to go. But don't think if you're not winning like he is, or winning X amount every single day, you're a bad player. Forget about everyone, man. It's all relative, dude. It's all relative. Forget about everyone else. Focus on yourself. At the end of the day, Osimo's not paying your bills. Nobody is. You are. So worry about what's good for you. That's how I look at stuff too, man. Like, a lot of people have stuff to say online. You know more than I do, dude. A lot of people say stuff online. You can't you can't be caught up into everyone else's business. Worry about you, man. If the world wants to notice, great. If they don't, if they want to talk bad, good, whatever, great, fantastic. But just worry about yourself always, man. And if you do well, trust me, if that's what you want, people will start taking notice for sure.
As we close in, we got about 5 minutes left, and we'll see if there's any questions on the slate. But what have you learned throughout this NFL season so far that maybe you hadn't have known prior to these last 14 weeks?
Yeah, so dude, maybe about not so much NFL specifically, maybe DFS, man. Anyone can go on a bad run, right? Anyone can go on a bad run. I think for the longest time, people considered myself one of the best, like really large field GPP players. Look at this season. I mean, nothing stays forever, and the game just keeps evolving, man. So one thing I think for me is always stay humble, always stay a student of the game, and know that the landscape evolves, man. People get phased out, people catch up, people learn, people mimic, people do everything, and you're not going to stay at top for a long time, right? So kind of make the best of it, but most importantly, just keep adapting, because there's always going to be better news, there's always going to be better tools, there's always going to be better players, and just keep trying to be the best version of yourself that you can be. It can happen to anyone, and downswings are real. Just again, stay a student of the game as long as possible is my thing.
We'll go through each position real quick, and you could just give me your top player, your top player, and then also your top sneaky player. So quarterback, who you got?
Yeah, give me Pat Mahomes. I do like Deshaun Watson. My sneaky guy, probably Kyler Murray this week.
Okay. I do like Pat Mahomes as well. My sneaky guy is Derek Carr.
Nice. Interesting.
Running back. Who are we looking at?
Yeah, so give me Fournette. We talked about Fournette. Give me Barkley. And then if I had to give you a sneaky one, give me James White.
All right. My top guy, Chris Carson. And then my sneaky guy, just because his ownership is just severely low, is James White.
Nice.
Wide receiver.
Give me DeAndre. I like a ton. Give me Robert Woods. And if I needed a sneaky one, I'm kind of in between, but give me Fitzgerald or Amendola as a sneaky guy.
All right. My top guy, Chris Godwin. And then this is an interesting play that I'm going to say because he keeps showing up in Cruncher. He is one of the low-end wide receivers for the Miami Dolphins, Isaiah Ford.
Oh my God. You love these type of plays, dude.
Well, no, I'm just saying, because if they're still in concussion protocol, they're not going to make a decision until I believe Sunday, essentially. Even though they're practicing, they still have to get medically cleared. So technically speaking, if they're both essentially out, it's really hard to have a concussion and come back the next following game. And so all signs would point to Isaiah Ford, who actually has a really good matchup.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Yeah, all right, fair enough.
So, tight end.
Give me Travis Kelce. Give me Zach Ertz. Got to ride the train while it's hot, right?
All right, I'm going to go George Kittle. And then my low-end guy, man, it's really difficult. Probably say like a Jonnu Smith or Dallas Goedert, something like that.
Fair enough.
And then defense. Who's the defense that's going to go off this week?
Let me close my eyes and pick a team. Jacksonville.
Wow. Okay.
I know it's defense. I mean, that's extremely random. I don't know.
Right. All right. My sneaky defense, I'm going to go with the Redskins.
Fine. Fair enough. I like that.
Yeah, just to switch it up a little bit.
Yep.
All right, guys. Well, listen, we're coming here to an end. Don't forget, 50% off your first month, awesemo.com/NFL. Use the promo code NFL Strategy. Manny, thank you for joining us today, man. And today's my birthday, bro. What are we going to do?
Ooh, baby. Happy birthday, my guy, man. That's awesome. Don't look a year over 21. I love it, dude. Dude, whenever you want, man. I'm open. It's the weekend. It's Miami. I mean, I don't know, but if you're in Miami, go big or go home, dude. That's my thing, at least. All
right, man. And I'm gonna obviously text you here in a little bit. I got your number. But
cool.
Before we go, where can we find you at?
Yeah, my Twitter's at mlaura, I think up here, like my name. You can find my live streams usually right after this, twitch.tv/mlaura. Most of my work is on fantasycruncher.com, the tools that you guys are using. So good luck tonight, everyone.
Yeah, and everyone in here, thank you so much. Find me at Chris Randone on all platforms. Don't forget to give us a like. Continue supporting this content. We really appreciate every single one of you spending the time with us and viewing our content day in and day out. Other than that, guys, have a great weekend. Good luck and play good players, guys. Take care.